Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is J.C. Gayer. I'm working with the University of Auckland in New Zealand, although I'm here on behalf of my usual Philippine NGO partner, which is the Center for Disaster Preparedness. And I'm going to talk today about prisons and prisoners in disasters, which is the kind of unusual topics we are investigating right now. We've got another talk tomorrow afternoon at 4 about lesbians, gays, transsexuals and bisexuals in disasters. So it's more or less the same approach of marginalized groups in disasters. And I want to acknowledge the leading contribution of my fantastic and brilliant undergraduate students from the University of Grenoble, Fanny Navise, who actually did most of the field work, and who did the field work actually in some prisons. Should find the remote. Where's the remote? Okay. In France. Actually, my interest in prisons and prisoners in disasters dates back to when I saw these two prisons in Aceh, in Indonesia, after the tsunami in 2004. One in Molabo, one in Banda Aceh, which were swept by the tsunami and where only one warder actually survived out of 1,000 people living in these two prisons, and without any chance to escape because they were within the prison. And that triggered my interest, and actually when you look at the literature, there's virtually nothing about prisons and prisoners in disasters. And that's what we are trying to investigate now. Based on some interviews we conducted in 4 prisons, or around 4 prisons in southern France. Unfortunately, we can't disclose the exact location of these prisons for security reasons, and because the warders actually asked not being quoted, because they don't want the prisons to be considered as a bad practice place. So it's a bit tricky actually, and it's even more tricky because it's easier to interview warders, sort of prosecutors, people giving training to the prisoners, counselors, nurses, but we can't actually physically interview prisoners because in France you need to be a relative or kin of one of the prisoners to get access to the prison. So it's a bit tricky. We don't have the voice of the prisoners. We are trying to snake into the prisons right now, but it's a bit tricky. Anyway, prisons are very vulnerable. You'll see I had to split the vulnerability slide into 2 slides because it's very, very long. Prisons are very vulnerable because most of them, in France at least, it's not the case in New Zealand, for example, but most are in poor conditions, most are overcrowded, most are understaffed in terms of warder and people working in the prison. You've got tight security measures, meaning that when you've got an emergency, it's difficult for the rescue teams and all the aid agencies to get into the prison because you need to pass through gates and security checks, etc. So it takes time to get into the prison. Then afterwards, you've got this changing leadership. The directors of the prisons are changing every 3 or 4 years, if I'm not mistaken. So they lack the knowledge about the place, they lack the knowledge about the issues within the prison, and they lack the knowledge about issues in terms of natural hazards around the prison. And then these prisons are usually badly integrated within the larger community because they've got this bad reputation, and in most cases no one knows what happens inside and no one knows what happens outside from the inside. Okay, now let's move to the prisoners, who are as well very vulnerable because they cannot move freely, so they don't have any way to escape on their own, obviously because of security reasons, and it's very much understandable. Most of them actually are in poor health in France. Some suffer from mental disorders, some are illiterate. Actually, it's 25% in France who are illiterate in the prisons. So when the information is vehicled mostly through newspaper, because they have access to newspaper but not to other forms of information, it's a bit tricky. Prisoners are said to be selfish. Actually, according to the warders and according to the trainers, meaning that you can't actually expect much mutual help in time of disasters. They're actually fighting each other when they go for a walk outside of the cells. And most important, I think that all information regarding evacuation plans, security measures are kept away from the prisoners. They don't have access to any information for understandable reasons. But it's tricky in time of emergency, especially in times of flooding. I'll go back to this issue later. They know how it works in case of fire, cell fire, not wildfire, cell fire, because they are the ones usually putting fire to their room or to their mattress just to get some stuff they want to have. So it's a sort of blackmailing the warders, so they know how to get attention to them. But for flooding, for example, they don't know that. And usually they are negatively considered within the society. Okay, so now we've got the vulnerability. Fortunately, not everything is bad. There are some resources, there are some capacities. The warders usually very well known their prisoners. They know them very well in terms of personal interrelationships, their background, so they have a good interaction with them. They've got training for quick intervention in times of fire or in times of suicide attempt, and it's very often in the prisons. They've got some warning systems in times of riot and fire, so they've got some intercom system, they've got some warning alarm or signals within the prisons. Obviously it may not work in time of flooding when electricity is going down. And there are, oops, sorry for that, there are some very skilled rescue team, operation team, quick response team, but these teams in France actually are located in 4 cities, big cities in France, in the 4 corners of France. So it means that it takes time for them, it takes usually hours or days for them to come over to the prison to rescue the prisoners. So it's an issue. And what's interesting here is that usually I'm always arguing that capacities are endogenous to the communities, while vulnerability is usually exogenous, largely exogenous in terms of structural constraints, and capacities are usually endogenous to the communities, because it's local knowledge, it's social network, it's memory of past event, experience. Here, all capacities are exogenous to the prisons. This makes the case of prisoners and prisons very particular in terms of DRR. Okay, now, in this context, we've got a framework for DRR which is very top-down, technocratic and command and control. I mean, all the decisions are taken at the provincial level. Then the information goes down to the director of the prison, then down to the warders. I mean, there's no decision possible at the local level. If the prison gets flooded, the warders can't do anything. They need the decision from the director, who need the decision from the provincial level. At the provincial level, obviously the provincial government doesn't very well know the case of the prison and how it goes within the prison. So it takes time, ages usually, for a decision to be made in time of emergency. So it's a major issue. It's very well defined, but command and control, top-down and technocratic, slow decision making. Okay, and it doesn't work. And we had 2 very recent examples in France. The one in 2003 in southern France, when the prison of Arles had to be evacuated because the ground floor here was flooded. So they first moved the prisoners up to the 2nd floor. Then they had to evacuate them because it was too crowded. So they had to find a place which was not planned before. So they had to dispatch all the prisoners in different prisons all over the country, actually. And it was tricky because in France you need to evacuate all the prisoners handcuffed. And so imagine when they have to get down these steps handcuffed with all the security measures around, and nothing was planned at the time. And it was tricky, very tricky. And it happened again last year in 2010 in June, when this prison in southern France, in Draguignan, was flooded. Actually the entire event killed 60 people or so. And this prison was flooded up to the 2nd floor as well. And it was problematic because when they decided to evacuate the prison in the same condition than the previous one, there were some families visiting the prisoners. And they evacuated the families at the same place, at the 2nd floor, with the prisoners. So for security reasons, it was a mess, because there were some very highly dangerous criminals with family members. And they didn't expect that at all. Nothing was planned. They repeated the same mistakes as 7 years before, and nothing was planned. So it leads me to the conclusion, which is that prisons are very particular in time of DRR. In case of DRR, in time of disasters, you have to include them as a particular setting. You can't apply the same top-down technocratic as you should not actually in any case, but in the case of prison it's very particular. You have to consider that the prisoners are special people in the sense that they can't do anything on their own. Usually in the management of the prison, daily issues overcome natural hazards, rare and extreme natural hazards in terms of decision making, especially the fire, violence and suicide, which are very often, which often happens in the prison. Then lessons are not learned, obviously, as I just mentioned before, and there is a crucial need basically for hearing the voice of the first concern, who are the prisoners, in terms of research and in terms of DRR as well, for policy making and practice. I heard this morning from Terry Cannon that in the UK, in Ireland actually, some people are giving first aid training to the prisoners, just for them at least to handle first-hand issues on their own. Nothing of this kind happened in France right now, and I think there are ways forward, as what I mentioned before, which may be applied to the case of prisoners. They can be empowered, actually, they can be empowered within the cell of their prisons. I think it's very much possible, as long as there's a political will for that. I thank you very much, and you'll see me again actually in 45 minutes, because I'm going to give a second talk on participatory mapping. Thank you very much. I'm not sure if there's, I haven't heard the gong, so if you've got questions, I can have maybe one question. Yeah. I can, so I can entertain one question.
Thanks very much for the really interesting presentation, JC. I'm just wondering if you've got any examples from the limited research that was available that outlines anywhere where they actually utilize prisoners as a response resource?
I saw a short movie in the 1930s on YouTube from the US, where prisoners actually were used to sandbag the river banks of a river. But I guess this should work with these prisoners who can be trusted in a way which is I know there are prisons, actually there's one in France, there's one in the Philippines, where prisoners can move around freely in specific contexts. So I guess in that cases you can use them for this kind of dirty jobs, like sandbagging. So I've encountered some movies like that, but not from the literature. But actually, Greg Baumkopf told me that in the Philippines back in the 19th century, prisoners were used as well by the Spanish government to do some sandbagging and this kind of work in time of flooding and typhoons. But it's not recent cases actually.
Thank you very much.
I don't think you can do that in Guantanamo. Thanks a lot.